On July 13th, a Ukrainian regiment broke a piece of news to the public that Russian command hadn't fully absorbed yet. An entire oblast had just slipped out of their hands. Not a village, not a tree line, a region Russia had spent a year and a half trying to occupy. And almost nobody outside the units involved saw it happening until it was already done. Tonight's story is about an operation that its own commanders admit they can't fully reconstruct. Not because nothing happened, but because it was built on purpose to be invisible until it was finished. Welcome back. Let's start with the 6 names nobody outside this front line had heard of a week earlier. Ternov, Zaporizhzhia, Novogeorgivka, Voronezh, Sichneve, Malivka. 6 settlements in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, all Russian held on the morning of July 12th. By the evening of July 13th, Ukraine's 425th Separate Assault Regiment, call sign Skelya, Rock, announced that all 6 were back under Ukrainian control. Advanced depth, 25 kilometers. Territory reclaimed, over 120 square kilometers, in roughly a day and a half of fighting. Here's the detail that turns a battlefield report into something closer to a confession. When asked how long the operation actually took to plan and execute, the officers involved gave an answer that wasn't evasive. It was structural. "We don't know how long this operation lasted," one lieutenant colonel said afterward, "since it was shrouded in what is known as the fog of war." That's not a soldier being cagey with a reporter. That's the entire operation having been deliberately built around a total information blackout, tight enough that even the people who ran it can't hand you a clean timeline after the fact. No leaks, no early claims, no social media confirmation until the ground was already held. Even the regiment's own public announcement of what it had achieved briefly disappeared online after being cited by other outlets, before the broader operational picture was confirmed through multiple independent military monitoring channels. A small sign of just how tightly this was held even after the fighting itself was over. Now here's why Russia had troops in this exact spot to lose in the first place. This wasn't Russia's first attempt at this stretch of the map. In late 2025 and early 2026, Russian forces pushed at the junction of the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions specifically to build what Vladimir Putin himself had repeatedly floated in public, a so-called buffer zone. For a while, it worked. Russian units captured a string of settlements along this line. Ukraine spent the following months grinding that gain back in the other direction. A counteroffensive that had already reclaimed roughly 480 square kilometers since January, in slow, largely unpublicized pieces, before this particular week. That grinding, methodical phase is easy to overlook precisely because it produced no single dramatic headline of its own. A village here, a tree line there, reported in passing if it was reported at all. While the buffer zone Putin had described in speeches quietly shrank underneath him, one unremarkable skirmish at a time. That's the setup for the July 13th push, not a sudden lucky breakthrough, but the final act of an 8-month campaign that had been quietly eating away at the same Russian salient the entire time. The assault itself launched from the Velikomikhailovka area, with dozens of assault groups moving out simultaneously in 2 directions at once, east and south. Rather than pushing along a single axis, Russian defenders could mass against. Regiment reports describe constant air support running through the advance, with Russian positions along the routes worked over around the clock before troops physically entered a settlement. And running alongside all of it, a specific named priority: identifying and eliminating Russian drone operators systematically, rather than treating them as incidental targets. In a war where a single skilled drone pilot can hold up an advancing unit for hours, hunting the pilots themselves rather than just the drones they fly was as much a part of the operation as the ground assault. Splitting the assault across 2 axes also meant Russian commanders couldn't simply reinforce one weak point and expect the front to hold. Every reserve they committed to the eastern push was a reserve that wasn't available when the southern one hit at the same time. The clearest single objective inside the whole push was a village called Tearivka. On paper, it's nothing, a name most maps don't bother labeling. In practice, it sat on a logistics route Russian forces in the sector depended on to move supplies and reinforcements forward. Ukrainian strikes destroyed a concentration of personnel there from Russia's 656th Motorized Rifle Regiment, part of the 29th Combined Arms Army. Once Tearivka fell under Ukrainian fire control, that supply route stopped being something Russia could rely on. which meant every unit further along that road was now fighting on a logistics line Ukraine could interdict at will. Take one obscure village off a Russian commander's map, and every unit that used to depend on the road running through it inherits a supply problem it never saw coming, whether or not a single soldier from those units was anywhere near Tearivka itself when it fell. The unit that paid for holding this ground was Russia's 120th Naval Infantry Division, a formation freshly stood up from the 336th Naval Infantry Brigade, part of the Baltic Fleet, sent inland to a battle nowhere near open water. Alongside elements of the 68th Army Corps, the division took what its own opposing regiment called critical losses. That phrase is doing real work here. Naval infantry brigades are typically treated as some of Russia's more capable formations, not conscripts thrown forward to test a line, but troops built for exactly this kind of contested advance. Losing this badly against a regiment operating under strict media silence with no permanent media presence pushing its own narrative is not the story Russian command wanted written about a unit carrying elite in front of its name. A brigade trained and equipped for amphibious assault, thrown 1,000 kilometers from any coastline to plug a gap in a landlocked steppe, is itself a small admission of how thin Russia's actual reserves in this sector had become. By the time the dust settled on July 13th, analysts tracking the broader front assessed something bigger than a single good week for one regiment. Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, for the first time since Russian forces began pushing into it, was effectively clear of Russian ground troops. Nearly everything Russia had gained in the region since August of the previous year had been reversed. An entire administrative region, contested for the better part of a year, changed hands in the same news cycle most outlets spent covering other fronts entirely. Which may be the clearest evidence yet of how deliberately this operation avoided the kind of attention that usually follows a result this size. None of this means the war in this sector is over, or that Russia can't attempt another push at the same junction in the months ahead. Fronts this size don't stay static for long, and a cleared oblast today doesn't guarantee a cleared oblast in September. But the operational model behind July 13th, total information blackout, simultaneous multi-axis assault groups, systematic drone pilot hunting, layered under constant air support, a single logistics choke point identified and strangled before the main push even started, is now proven, documented, and sitting in the regiment's own after-action reporting for whoever plans the next one. A regiment nobody was watching quietly took back an entire oblast in a day and a half. Its own commanders still can't tell you exactly when the operation started, because that was the entire point. If an operation this size can stay invisible until it's already finished, what else is currently happening along this front line that neither side has decided to talk about yet?